Hi everyone. I'm making this video in week 11. Time really flies and um, I'm making it, actually it's originally inspired by the exchange I was having with Victoria on last week's discussion board about Taoism and the deities and rituals in Taoism being literal and symbolic, basically. And it's funny how things can start from a seed because it sprouted, and so I have a number of things I want to sort of tie together, coming from that seed, basically. And I think it's important for the stage of the course, but it's important for us, I think, in our appreciation of indigenous spirituality and probably Taoist spirituality as well, but that we can talk about more. So first of all, I want to make a connection which will be well known to Casey because she took the consciousness course last semester. But I want to bridge the consciousness course and this one at this point in time because I think it's very relevant. And the way I wanted to bridge it is this idea that human consciousness has been evolving and in some respects devolving, if you see what I mean. So there's this strange mode that many people, thinkers, philosophers, and all kinds of people have thought about the evolution of consciousness. They see it as an evolution for the most part. In other words, it's a progression. It's a forward motion, but that forward motion involves loss, and particularly in our case, we started from a time when you might call it primitive humans time, and then of course we've evolved through what they call the axial age, and to the time with the rise of monotheism and the world's great Abrahamic traditions, at least, and onto modernity and our scientific materialist place. So this evolution has involved two things, I suppose, mainly. One is the loss of a kind of intimacy with the cosmos, and two, the gain of individuality. So and that's reflected in the world's religions, actually. Way back when, so say prior to the axial age, actually up into the axial age, and then we had a kind of consciousness as evidenced by many different lines of inquiry. We had a kind of consciousness that was saw itself as embedded in a larger cosmos. In other words, we didn't have so strong of a sense of a separate self. And part of that embeddedness in the cosmos was the perception of its life, if you see what I mean, the perception of its, what you might call its enchantment. And that enchantment involves the, if you like, the inner quality of the world. We in the West have really reduced the world to outer qualities, but back then, inner qualities were a primary constituent of the world, if not the primary constituent of the world. So one perceived inequalities in the world everywhere, and you were related to them. They weren't super sort of separate from you. There's your inequalities, the inequalities of the world, and these are forming a whole or a one. And what has been going on in the evolution of human consciousness then is the gradual separation from that degree of content or embeddedness in the world. Owen Barfield called it original participation. So we're slowly losing our sense of original participation in the world. And you could think of this as being something like the fall in Christianity or something like that, but it's like our individuality basically is rising as our ability to use reason and rational thought is rising. And and this individuality is in a certain sense, a step forward, but in another sense, it's a step backwards, because we're losing something that's equally real, right? This connection to the world, this embeddedness in the world, this participation in the world. We're losing that and gaining this individuality. And part of the gain of this individuality, according to people like Rudolf Steiner, is that we have increasing ability to think, to use our thinking. And for him, the higher degree to which we can use our thinking, the freer we are. So there's a rise in freedom with this evolution that we're in. But it leads us to a place where we are now, where we feel ourselves separate from the world, from the cosmos, from the universe, from God, and actually probably from ourselves as well. We feel ourselves separate, and yet we have individuals, and we have our individual freedom. We've gained something and lost something incredibly precious. And a lot of these people then say that the upcoming task for humanity is to regain our participation, regain the connectedness to the cosmos, the embeddedness within it, regain the perception of the enchantment of the world, the inner aspect of the world, regain that while not losing our individuality, basically. So that we will, at some point in the near future, we will go forth with both of these aspects, and this will represent a kind of progress for our consciousness. Okay, so now I'm going to relate that back to indigenous spirituality. So one can assume, I think, that indigenous spirituality grows out of that place that we used to be in way back when, before the fall, before the rise of the intellect and reason and our ability to think, our freedom, our individuality. Before that, okay, indigenous spirituality represents a spirituality that's coming from that time. Well, indeed, all spiritualities have come originally from that time. They've just been modified as time has gone forward, right? They've evolved. So, and we tend to look at, religions, especially the Abrahamic religions, as an evolutionary step forward, in the sense that they're monotheistic. And so there's a sense in religious studies that monotheism represents an advance, if you see what I mean. And I think that's not a good way to look at it. It's certainly a change, but it's on the one hand an advance, and on the other hand a regression. So, or a loss. But anyway, to relate that to this week, so the indigenous spirituality is coming out of the enchanted universe, essentially. And that's a universe where we knew our connection to it intimately, deeply. It was who we are. And so that still lies within us to be reclaimed, to necessarily be reclaimed. And I want to contrast this, that we need, why we need the indigenous spirituality, the traditions and Taoism and all of this variety of religions, is that I don't think the Western religions fully capture that. They don't necessarily help us with that, with the recovery of the enchantment of the world. Now, some aspects do, especially mystical aspects, mystical Judaism, for example, um, could easily be seen as helping with that. But religions like Taoism, and then particularly indigenous spirituality, they give us a dose of what we need, if you like. It's not like we don't need the Abrahamic traditions. We do. We do need the advance that they represent. But we also need what we had before that we lost, right? This deep connection with the enchantedness of the world. So, and I want to talk more about this enchantedness aspect. So, this video is going to be longer than I wanted it to be, but okay. So, we tend to think that the monotheistic traditions are different, if you see what I mean, because they're monotheistic, and that represents an advance. Somehow, if you're monotheistic, you know more than a group that you would call polytheistic. Well, as it turns out, it's not true to call indigenous traditions polytheistic. That isn't actually the case, nor would it be the case with Taoism. So even though there are deities in both of these things, deities, spirits, entities of all kinds, these could be characterized by the phrase multiplicity in unity, which is a very important phrase. Multiplicity in unity. It captures something very real about our existence. So in all of the indigenous traditions, you will find reference to a supreme creator, if you like. In some Native American traditions, it's called Wakan Tonka, which gets translated as Great Spirit, but it really actually apparently translates as Great Mystery, which is a fantastic translation. So the supreme truth is called the Great Mystery or Great Spirit, and that is one, and that as Wakan Tonka, as Great Spirit, gets involved in creation, gets closer to creation or whatever, then there's aspects of Wakan Tonka, who is transcendent, becoming immanent. And in that becoming immanent, what you get are this multiplicity of deities, right? And the deities become personalized. They have character, and they're like beings, essentially, and we call them deities or spirit beings or whatever. And so the world is inhabited by multiplicity, but it's a multiplicity in unity. These are all facets of, aspects of Great Spirit, Great Mystery, as it comes into this world, as it is more and more involved in creation. Now, for the Native Americans, other indigenous peoples, this is not an intellectual game. This is a game of perception, right? So, and what happens is, what the spirits, beings, the deities, are perceived. They're a perceived reality, and you might call it an intuitive form of perception, or we might give it a different name. It's not the typical through the senses kind of perception that we imagine. But nevertheless, these aren't thought up, they're discovered. And the fact that in different indigenous traditions, things might look different, if you see what I mean, on the whole, they're kind of the same. So in detail different, but on the whole the same. The detail difference being that this realm that we're investigating here, we might call it the imaginal realm, we might call it the enchanted realm, this realm where other kinds of existence and beingness are perceived, this realm. is not a realm of concrete, what we might call concrete knowing, concrete knowledge, like science gives us in our world. This is a realm of inner knowing, intuitive knowing, and therefore it's in some sense much less concrete in terms of certain kinds of truth, much less perhaps specific, but in some ways more true. And we can talk about that if you want. So that what you get in an indigenous tradition and other traditions is the transcendent and the immanent, and multiplicity in unity, basically. And we could draw a parallel. We could draw a parallel with mystical Judaism. We had Ein Sof, okay, the great mystery, Ein Sof. And we saw that as Ein Sof cascades down into the universe, the dog's digging a hole here, stop it. Then you start to see the characteristics of Ein Sof, if you see what I mean, and all of the tree of life, for example, until you get down to Shekinah in this world, the aspect of Ein Sof that is in this world, basically the feminine aspect. Well, it's something like that is going on with indigenous traditions and coming from Great Spirit, Great Mystery, into the multiplicity of this world, the multiplicity that first involves spirit beings and deities, and then us. And our perception of these beings, deities, these beings and deities form then a place of access, if you see what I mean. In other words, the spirit beings and deities are can be perceived, and one can have a relationship with them. And that, in fact, that is the emphasis in indigenous traditions, is the emphasis is on relationship in such a way that it leads to harmony. And so one is in relationship with the enchanted world. And and this represents a very different kind of emphasis than we typically get from religious traditions. So access to Wakantanka then is via these aspects of Wakantanka that exist in this world, the multiplicity, the personified, the personalities, if you like, that exist. And we see this all expressed in the medicine wheel. So the medicine wheel, first of all, the symbol of the circle represents the whole throughout human history. So we have the wheel, the circle. And so it represents the whole in terms of this world, our universe kind of thing. So that's the immanent. But we have the transcendent represented by the center of the circle. In the center, you stand in the center and you look up. And that is towards the Great Mystery. Great Mystery is on that axis, the still point of the wheel. But as Great Spirit comes into existence, you get the spokes of the medicine wheel, right? Characteristics. Okay? The west, the south, the east, the north, they have their spirit animals, they have their characteristics. And these characteristics are aspects of the Great Mystery. And they aren't invented by the human mind, they're perceived by the intuitive by intuitive perception of indigenous peoples, and potentially ultimately maybe us again. And so this perception is not a perception of symbols, it's a perception of reality. And that's what I want to say here. I'm going to try this out on you guys because of this discussion with Victoria, but these things are real to these people. They've perceived them, and in a very interesting way, I think we have to think of them as being real. And in some ways more real than the reality we know currently. And I think that's important. And we can discuss all of this on Friday if you want. So, these animal spirits and characteristics of the directions, the multiplicity and the unity, then these characteristics, the animal spirits, are perceived and are seen as real. In other words, this world really is characterized by these beings. It's an enchanted world. It's the imaginal realm. They call it the imaginal realm. Not just imagine, because the imaginal realm is something that is deeply real in many traditions, and that's a deeper subject to talk about. But it's not like it's just your imagination kind of thing. I just made that up. No, this is how the imagination can aid perception as a route to the real. And so these things are to be regarded as real, and we can see that you're actually involved then in something somewhat like the tree of life when you're involved in the medicine wheel. And I think this is a very interesting aspect of indigenous traditions. And I think that what this does for me is it makes the world personal. So what you've got is an impersonal transcendent, somewhat impersonal, not totally, I would say, because the transcendent has to be able to include the personal, right? I mean, it includes everything. So, but it appears, at least, the transcendent appears impersonal. But then, as you come into this world, different Sephiro in the Tree of Life, or the directions of the medicine wheel, and everything involved, then you're getting the personal. You're getting the world made of the personal in such a way that it's an enchanted world, in such a way that you can have a relationship with it. And so this is what I'm putting forth, that this is what we need. If you see what I mean, we have the impersonal. So we've done this journey into individuality and our freedom of thought and our objectivity, and we've done the impersonal, and this is probably why religions like Buddhism are so prevalent in the West, is because the impersonal aspect of Buddhism is easy for us to get into. But this all ignores the fact that something incredible and real has been lost in this evolution of consciousness. And so what indigenous traditions and some other ones give us is something we absolutely need. We have to take them seriously, and somehow integrate what we know from them back into our main religions, the Abrahamic religions, for example. This is what I see anyway, and I'm throwing all this out there because to stimulate discussion, and you can disagree with me, of course, as usual. And so I'm just trying to, in a way, provoke thought. But this, for me, this is this connecting factor, the sort of missing piece of the puzzle that might be provided by indigenous spirituality is extremely important. And I don't say that we should all become like New Agers and into Native American ritual. I'm not saying that, but we have to regain that ability to perceive the world as alive, as enchanted. We have to regain the imaginal realm and then bring that back to our more detached, transcendent-oriented religions and our materialist culture, basically. And I'm saying this because it's something that's real. I think it's real. I'm saying it's real. I'm putting that out there, that it's real. It's not a product of fancy. So So something important is going on here, and I wanted to try and throw that out at you, and you can throw it back at me in a million pieces. And so let's get that out. Let me get this out there to you before Friday, and we have our discussion, because I think this maybe help us talk about things. I don't know. Okay, everyone. Talk to you soon.